Okay, I'll carry on. So what I want to do is talk about some experiences of managing major organizational change and transformation work, and what some of the context for that now looks like, given the speed at which things are moving. There's a major report from the federal government that suggests that something like 4 out of 10 Canadian jobs will disappear in the next decade due to innovations in technology. And we're already seeing that in a number of sectors. A very large organization in the insurance sector just replaced all of its insurance staff, its adjusters, with IBM Watson, and displaced 8,000 people in Japan. So there are major changes taking place, and I just wanted to walk through some thinking about what this looks like. But before we start looking at what the technologies are that will drive some of this change, I wanted to talk about the kinds of change we're talking about. Now, be warned, this next slide is really busy. So we're talking about a number of different kind of changes in organizations. The first one is operational transformations, where we're trying to really shift the operational basis of how a firm or an industry works. And we're beginning to see that in construction. So I was with a group of house builders yesterday who used to build on site from digging holes in the ground right up to a full-scale 3-bedroom house. Now 95% of that construction is done in a warehouse and brought to the site, and soon we'll be 3D printing houses on site. So these are kind of operational transformations. Still, people are doing lots of things in the same way, but this is a way of actually bridging between one technology and another. The second kind of change, the one in the middle here, is fundamental change, so actually reimagining how a business gets done. Many years ago, I was working with Blockbuster, and we went to the board of Blockbuster in the US and said, you ought to buy this startup called Netflix. And they said, it's fly in the night, it's not going to be here for long, why would we worry about it? And where is Blockbuster? But we were there 2 years before Netflix had profit. And so the ability to transform an industry now is very, very real. There's a very interesting statistic about how long companies stay on the Standard & Poor top 500 index. In the 1930s, it was an average of about 90 years. Currently, it's 13 years. So major corporations are seeing their life cycles change. And then the third thing is a complete strategic transformation of a company or an industry sector. And we've seen that with a number of kinds of organizations. The one that's used here is Apple. But I would say that Google is in the transformation business. And those people now building electric cars, people like Tesla, and those kind of companies are changing that game. And there are already companies like Local Motors, which are 3D printing cars, that can have a major impact on the way a sector works. So these are the kind of transformations and changes that we're talking about. Now, McKinsey points out that most of these changes and transformations don't work. In fact, the success rate is about 30%. So in other words, 70% of attempts to change and transform fail. And this is a kind of map of why. You need to have alignment around all of these components: vision, skills, reward and recognition, reallocating of resources, and a very specific, concrete action plan that also is accompanied by courageous leadership. So the top line is what works, and that only happens in a very small number of cases. The majority of examples we can look at, and there's some wonderful Harvard Business cases and other cases that demonstrate these other things. In higher education, in the university sector, for example, anybody who attempts to make a transformative change of a university, especially in Europe or North America, is going to feel all of these things except the change. Every single vice chancellor who's made a significant attempt, or a university president, to transform a higher education institution, by and large, is gone within a single term. So the first line on this slide is the line that we're trying to get to, and this is not easy. I did a lot of work in Heinz Europe to help them transform the business in Europe to actually try and make some money. They're historically losing money. And the problem we had was the vision was very clear. We realigned all the incentives. We had literally millions of euros to play with, but we didn't have the skills and competences in middle and senior management to deliver to the value. We got there, but it took twice as long as it should. So I think this slide's quite important. And the other one to recognize is that most people are not keen on change. In fact, as a psychologist who used to work in a clinic and did a lot of work with families in distress, is that the number of people that are keen on change is actually quite small. And most leaders spend a lot of time trying to get the laggards and the late majority to come on board. Whereas in fact, if they worked on the front end, the innovators and the early adopters and the early majority, they'd do a lot better job. So what we find then, especially with technology-driven innovation, is that most organizations are always in this in-between time. They invest in a technology in the hope it produces something fantastic, but it rarely delivers on the value they're looking for. And they end up kind of stuck then, locked into a technology they've spent millions on, but it doesn't deliver the value that they want. And so change is actually quite tough. So let me talk about some of the technologies that I think are going to make a massive difference to how industry works. The first is artificial intelligence and the intelligent network. Now, last year, 750,000 surgeries were conducted using robotics just in North America. And a lot of those have been driven by the increasing use of artificial intelligence. So one of my clients is Alberta Health, and I was in a MRI unit watching how they've attached artificial intelligence to reading MRI scans, and so that the clinical team has an intelligent system that says, this is what you should look at. Here's the AI diagnosis for this patient. They don't have to accept it, but it's sitting there. And as I say, IBM Watson is beginning to replace all sorts of functions. IBM Watson, for example, is probably one of the best intelligence networks in the world, but Google has an AI team based out of London, funnily enough, staffed by a large number of Canadians, many of them from the University of Alberta, that's using intelligent systems to support operational functions of firms. Another example of AI is, and robotics working together, is I took a group of my graduate students around the BMW plant in Cowley, Oxfordshire, that produces a brand new custom-built BMW Mini every 61 seconds. And the 120 people on shift, each shift, there are 3 shifts a day, are there to maintain the robots, not to build cars. And the system is intelligent enough to reject vehicles that haven't been built to standard or haven't met quality control standards, all of which are automatically managed through AI. So that's one kind of development. The second one is there's an X Prize challenge for handheld devices that do clinical diagnostics for 10 or more clinical conditions. And the rule of the prize is that it must be handheld, it must be able to do this within 30 minutes, and it must be able to do this very simply and a low cost. The number of organizations competing for that prize is huge. And you will see more and more handheld devices that do very powerful things. And so I think we're going to see the decline of desktop computing and those kind of devices, and the move to integrated devices that we can carry in hand. Now, we're also seeing in all sorts of organizations predictive analytics. One of the examples I could give is the Open University, which is in the UK, has 250,000 students, can now predict with reasonable accuracy the likely performance of every student it has. It can also predict which students are in difficulty and suggest routes for intervention to reduce student dropout or student failure. And it does so using a combination of blockchain technology and predictive analytics. So we're seeing really powerful uses of analytics. Another example is in healthcare here in Alberta, we've massively reduced death from strokes by using predictive analytics based on doctor visits, all sorts of analytics about patient performance, and also intervening earlier through equipping ambulance services and first responders with all the technologies they need to do what a doctor normally did once they got through triage and into emerge. So the analytics systems are now doing a lot more work. Preventive maintenance is another, where on the pipeline technologies, we can now predict stress and potential fracture of pipelines from the behavior of the pipelines, shell and interior. So there's lots of ways in which predictive analytics are being used. The Internet of Things, everybody's been talking about this, it's seemingly for about a decade, but it's now beginning to happen. The house that I'm sitting in has 62 different sensors and a number of computers running to protect the property, but also to maintain it. And so this is an Internet of Things house. The only place I'm not allowed to have any sensors or technologies in the bedroom, but that'll come. In all sorts of examples of teaching, and I'll give a specific one in a moment from Northern Ontario, gamification and the use of VR is growing. So in the mining program at Northern College up there in Timmins, they have developed simulations of virtually every mining condition that takes place in the Ring of Fire up there, so that students can practice their responsive to these conditions, both individually and in groups in real time, but in a safe environment. My favorite example of virtual reality and simulation in games is when Sully landed that plane on the Hudson. He was asked how did he know how to do it, and he said he'd done it 46 times before, but always in a simulator. And I think that kind of makes the point that these are ways of creating safe conditions in which we can practice difficult things. At the Consumer Electronics Show a year ago, a little device that you can wear around your neck that does automatic translation from 72 languages was made available for the first time. And it has an accuracy rate of 90%. Now, Google are experimenting with contact lenses, which also do the same, so that you can turn it on and off by blinking, and it will translate what it's hearing in front of it in a different language into the language you've chosen to hear that translation from. And you can change the language you're listening to, sorry, you're translating to by setting up with your handheld device. So translation is becoming critical to all sorts of sectors. In the academic research field, the largest single group of people producing papers are doing so in China. And historically, that's been very difficult to access, but instant translation of these materials is now making this research much more accessible to everybody here in the West. My company builds collaborative technologies, ways in which teams and groups and organizations can collaborate. And we've seen the growth of social media, but what we're now seeing is the integration of collaborative technologies into ways of working in organizations. Our major clients are financial institutions and banks, and also health systems. And we're facilitating changes in the practice of healthcare in 12 countries through these collaborative technologies. And the last technology that I think is going to have a huge impact is this 3D printing business. There's a video that circulated 2 weeks ago of a company in California that can now 3D print using concrete reinforced with graphene a 2-bedroom house in 24 hours that meets California's building codes, and then you can put on the back of a truck and move, or build in situ. The interesting thing about that is that it costs less than $12,000 US dollars. And that's hugely interesting from a housing affordability, alleviation of poverty perspective, but also about feeding 9 billion people and housing 9 billion people. Here's a way in which we could get high quality properties into the hands of people that need them at an incredibly low cost, pretty well instantly. But there is also companies like Motors that are 3D printing vehicles. They have autonomous driving public transport running right now in Helsinki. We can 3D print body parts. My son is an occupational therapist, and one of his jobs is to use the 3D printing for body parts, particularly for amputees. We 3D printing all sorts of manufacturers good, but Pizza Hut are experimenting with 3D printing pizzas. So we're going to see all of these technologies, when used together, having the power to transform. So I think we're looking at a very different future. The future doesn't look like a straight line from the past. We're going to see quite a lot of change. I'm not sure we're going to see this, but that CNN are currently running a television series on their site that's actually a set of video casts that talk about the human robotic interface. And there's a lot of work going on about the idea of implants that can help us improve our performance or improve our way of living, particularly for those of us with damaged knees from sports or what I like to call a fishing injury, which is a kind of elbow problem. We can have elbow replacements done, but we can also put sensors in those that will warn us of future pain. So this is the first part of the presentation. I'm going to stop and encourage you to ask questions either through chat about what's driving these changes in technology and what the implications of these are. So I'll just stop for a moment and see if there are any questions coming up on the chat. Okay, so let's talk about, yes, I will be talking about the implications of all this and how we can help. There's a lot of dislocation going to take place. And one of the things we need to do is think about our education system and the ways in which we prepare people for skills. But I want to talk about what it looks like inside an organization to manage innovation first. You're asking about the reduced workforce. Some countries are in the middle of a conversation about exactly this question, Maggie, about the reduction in the workforce. Sweden is one of them. In fact, most of the Nordic countries are deeply involved in this conversation. I'm involved with a project with Finland and another one with Norway And both countries are working with their young people in high school and universities and colleges to encourage them to think about the nature of work and to balance life and work. Sweden last year experimented with the 6-hour working day. Finland and Norway are discussing the 4-day working week. So there's a whole conversation going on about balancing the economy and giving access to work for people that want to work. There's also a number of countries, and Canada's had a kind of brief discussion about the notion of the social wage or the living income, where we pay everybody, whether they're working or not, a flat amount of money each year. We get rid of all sorts of other social supports and we give people a basic living income. This was actually done in northern Manitoba for 4 years until the government changed. But what they found was paying people a living wage, guaranteeing a living wage, whether you had a job or not, increased high school completion, increased the throughput from high school to university or college, reduced healthcare demands, increased well-being, reduced drug consumption, and all sorts of other social benefits, but also encourage people to find work. So I think that's one response. The other reality is that we live in the gig economy. So 40% of Canadians and a growing number of people around the world do not have continued employment. They're not employees, they're contracted workers. And the gig economy is very real. The director of the career service at the University of Alberta was telling me last week that 30% of the students who will graduate this summer have no intention of looking for a full-time job. So, you know, the game is changing. Okay, I'm going to move on, but thanks for these questions. Keep them coming. I want to talk about the nature of innovation and how we think about the work of innovation. So there are most innovation in organizations and most innovations of products and services are what we call adopt, adapt. We see something in one place, we adopt it and then adapt it for use in another. This could be moving something we've seen in Europe to apply here, and we have to adapt it for winter conditions. Or we see an innovation in one industry and think, oh, that could work well in another. So very little of innovation that actually makes commercial value is breakthrough or disruptive innovation until now. A lot of it is essentially adopt adapt. The other thing I would say is most innovation has got nothing to do with universities. And so universities do good research. In fact, Canada punches way above its weight in terms of patents and invention. We're absolutely useless at turning that into commercial products and services. And so, you know, this is a kind of framework for thinking about innovation. What we need to think about is that a lot of things that I've just described on the technology list could have the power to be disruptive. And most of the venture capital companies I've talked to and worked with are looking at sustainable disruptive change that will have a big impact on an industry where they want to be a lead early adopter player. Most venture capital decisions are based on who is suggesting something, not what it is. So most venture capital is based on the persons or the people and their track record. When I worked for Axia and was out in the capital markets raising funds, the fact that I was with Art Price, who used to run Husky Oil, was also then Li Xing's bagman for North America, made all the difference, because if it was Art, they'd give him the money. If I'd went in with the same pitch, I was an unknown, I wouldn't get a penny. The other thing they look for is the potential for that return to get 15 to 20% back on that money within 3 to 4 years. A lot of these disruptive technologies will take longer. So the electric car, the driverless car, been around for about 20 years. In fact, Alberta's has a Centre for Testing of Autonomous Vehicles that was founded in 1987. So we've been around this technology for a long time. If you were a venture capital investor in 1987, you still haven't got your 15 to 20% back. So this is a framework for thinking about the kinds of innovation. And here's how the kind of innovation game works. The biggest skill we need to develop in our young people is to help them to find problems, to help them understand problems, to be problem finders and problem solvers, and to really be creative in understanding a problem from different perspectives. And so this kind of map is a design map. We need to teach every child in this country, actually around the world, the design skills involved in this map. What we're really bad at is linking problems to facts. I won't get into the conversation about alternative facts, but essentially, in order to solve a problem, we need to understand it from a number of different angles. And we need to reimagine that problem from those different angles. And then we need to find really big ideas that will transform that problem into an opportunity. This is in a basic simplex innovation process. But all of the writing on innovation and how companies do this actually misses a point, which is incredibly messy. It's hugely messy. I'll give you an example. We worked for Oracle Finance, and we reinvented how Oracle did its business. So one of the things we discovered, for example, is nobody in Oracle Finance spent any time using Oracle products to manage Oracle's money. They used spreadsheets from Microsoft Excel, and they used project management tools from Microsoft to manage the work. So we stopped that. We also stopped them having accountants in every country in which they operate, and consolidated their accounting operations into a single location in Dublin for the whole of the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. So we went from close to 1,800 accountants to 405, based in a building 2 doors down from the Guinness Brewery, which was a popular move. Now, to do that took 5 years. To do that, we had to transform the culture of an organization. To do that, we had to reimagine accounting. To do that, we had to train everybody to use the products that Oracle actually sold. It was incredibly messy and very complicated and full of politics. So, Pat Todd's on this call. She went through this kind of stuff at Textron. All of us who've been involved in this kind of work know how messy this work is. So, I think the process of innovation is very, very difficult, and a number of things get in the way. One of my ambitions was to get a word in the English dictionary, and I'm in some, I'm not in all. But the word I created some time ago, and I wrote a piece about this, was contrapreneur. This is somebody who's very enterprising about being contrary to everything you're trying to do. So, for example, they might be the first to volunteer to help with the intention of killing it. They're the first people to say that they will lead a team and then lead them off in the wrong direction. These are the people that to your face will say positive things, and behind your back will say all sorts of negative things. So people get in the way. People are your greatest assets, but you need to think carefully about focus and alignment of people. So one of the mistakes people make in the work of innovation is to focus on outcomes and technology. It's all about people. People can make or break an innovation. Which leads to this second point, that it's not about the technology. It's about the business. Technology can help, but technology is never the solution. In fact, If technology is the answer, then you're asking the wrong question. We need to think about how technology makes my life as an employee easier. We need to think about redesigning work, redesigning business processes, reimagining how we relate to customers, re-engaging the ways in which we work together to solve customer-based problems. So, for example, in higher education, I've been involved in online learning since it began in 1993. We were the first university to launch an online MBA program in 1993-94. But we never saw this as about the technology. We saw this about enabling collaboration, about creating flexibility for learners, about enabling us to change the curriculum in the light of what our students were experiencing. So rather than saying, this is the technology, this is a learning management system, we said, no, we can reimagine the learning process. And we can reposition the work of faculty and students as collaborators and co-construct learning together. And so that's what we saw. The technology was almost irrelevant to that. It enabled that, but it wasn't the driver. In so many examples, I see this in healthcare, I see this in other places, in other sectors. The technology seems to be driving. So, if technology is the answer, you're asking the wrong question. The work from McKinsey in their study of change and transformation, and it's they keep coming back to this work and keep redoing it, but the findings have been consistent now for 15 years. The fundamental reason most innovation projects fail is poor leadership. And by this we mean that leaders don't demonstrate by their behavior what it is that they are promoting. This is true not just simply from senior leaders, but right through to middle management and local supervisors. In change management, in innovation work, courageous leadership is the key. And it's a challenge, it's a constant challenge. One of our clients was Johnson & Johnson, and we used to do the annual employee surveys for the business worldwide. And the CEO and I sat down one day, I was coached the CEO, and the consistent feedback was there's no communication from management. And yet, if you look at Johnson & Johnson, it does more than any other company I've ever worked for in communicating with its people. And so, what do you have to do was the CEO's question. And I pointed out, you have to be there more often on the shop floor with people, talking to them about what matters most. You have to stop seeing an email as a communication. You could actually do a better job by having a 10-minute huddle on the factory floor with all those people making Johnson & Johnson's good in that location than sending an email to the same group of people. Powerful, personal, meaningful, authentic communication and authentic leadership through behavior is what makes the difference to success. And the McKinsey work bears that out. Very few innovation projects are linear. As I said before, they're very messy. And in that messy stuff in the middle, we can tend to lose sight of the vision and strategy. We get kind of sidetracked by some numbers from some data analytics that say this is not working well. And then rather than going back to the vision and strategy as guiding principles, we respond to that piece of data. And this is how major innovation and change gets lost. A current example of that is the Pearson Corporation, who just 10 years ago were the largest publisher on the planet. And they made a very bold and courageous decision to get out of being a publisher and become the world's largest learning organization. So they sold their interest in the Financial Times. They sold their shares in IDC, the consulting shop. They sold their shares in The Economist, all of which created about $9 billion of new cash to refocus the business about becoming a learning corporation. But early on, the signs were not good. And so, as I say, it takes some time for this stuff to work. As the quarterly share price slipped, and as the markets changed, because they were getting out of textbook publishing in the US as their prime business, shareholders panicked, management panicked, and everybody, except for one person, lost sight of the vision and strategy. But that person, the CEO, was no longer in a position of authority and power and influence because their strategy wasn't working. They hadn't done enough work on the ground with their ground troops to get them all focused and aligned about what the new business was and what it meant for the work. And they didn't change their reward and recognition strategy. They didn't change the way in which some aspects of the business were positioned in the market. And so they lost sight of where they were going. By the way, I think Pearson will be broken up and reformed and become all sorts of different pieces. And so I think, it's not a good time to invest. It's a good, well, it might be a good time to invest because their share price is low, but they're going to have to do a reconfiguration of the company. They've lost the plot. Another problem with innovation is using the wrong metrics. So one of our clients in the UK was Debenhams, which is a very large department store, kind of Nordstrom-like store. And the only metrics that mattered were year-on-year sales comparison, sales per square foot, like-by-like comparison of sales for that particular retail location, and so on. But looking in the rear view mirror doesn't tell us where we're going. So we got them to start measuring employee engagement and employee satisfaction, which the research shows very clearly is the best predictor of profitability and future performance. And we could show that a 5% drop in employee satisfaction engagement produced a 7% drop in sales 5 weeks later and produced a 4% drop in share price 10 weeks later. So we began managing relationships between people in the organization and people and products in the organization. And we reduced the number of measures being used to make business decisions from 48 to 6. Less is more, measure fewer things, but measure the right things. Many years ago, I had a client which was a very large Yorkshire brewery in the UK who measured about 1,800 things every week. But they never asked people, would you buy this beer again? And so we cut that down to 6 questions that were asked for in every pub every week. And we used that 6 sets of data to make good business decisions and therefore tripled the size of that brewery's operations. So asking the wrong questions, measuring the wrong things is pretty common. And so less is more. So again, I'll stop and see if you have any questions. Can I expand on the elements of resources for successful change? I think the 2 big resources are the people strategy that you have for change. So really thinking through how you're going to engage and work with everybody in the organization and how you're going to empower those nearest to the customer. One of our clients was Tesco in the UK, and they used to have a 42% turnover of the frontline staff, which cost them something in the order of $250,000 a month. They had to find and replace and retrain and all that kind of stuff. And it's a huge staff, over 380,000 employees, so big deal. We found that when we stopped the way they currently did things and asked staff to schedule themselves, the biggest reason for staff turnover was they couldn't meet the schedule set by their management. You have to be here on a Wednesday kind of schedule. When we said schedule yourself, turnover halved. And so empowerment is one of the biggest resources that we have, and we're not doing that well. And I think another major resource are these metrics. I mean, how we measure and use data to make good decisions is another key resource. And the third one is listening to customers. And so we did a lot of work in every contract I've ever had. And it's certainly part of our principles of my company that I run at the moment, is we see ourselves as partnering with customers, not providing service to them. So we're partners, we do provide service, but we do so through partnership. We co-design our products. We partner with our customers on how we roll out our products. The whole of this week, except today, is being spent with Alberta Health, helping them help us to do a better job in leveraging our products for their services. So I think there's lots of opportunities to think about how we do innovation well as a partnership work. So this is the last segment, and then we can have more time for dialogue questions. So keep suggesting questions here in the chat. So how do we get to impact? How do we sustain innovation over time? So some years ago, Don Simpson of the Innovation Expedition and I wrote this book on Renaissance leadership, and we described 6 characteristics that we think matter. The first is to practice personal mastery, and that I'm not here to promote my new book on personal mastery, which came out in January. But I think the idea that we as leaders in organization know who we are and are comfortable with who we are and are confident in who we are. And we know what our strengths and, more importantly, what our weaknesses are, and are able to surround ourselves with stronger people than us because we're strong in ourselves. I think that's a critical leadership characteristic of those people leading major change. I once had a client, I was called in by the board to ask the question, should we keep this chief executive officer? It's a job I've done about 9 times now, and I'm not doing it again. But on this occasion, the person was using company money for a major internal experiment on this question of personal mastery. $35 million would have been spent on a program of self-discovery within this electrical utility. And my diagnosis was that he was in a midlife crisis, but was trying to mask it. And I think that a strong leader who knows themselves and is comfortable with their weaknesses is a good person to work with. So you're not there to experiment on the organization, you're there to build it. Second characteristic that Don and I recognized in Renaissance leaders that were doing a great job at running great organizations was they thought about the world as a whole. They were connected to developments in the world, but were thinking locally. So hence this word global. And you can see that with those people who are imagining a different future for transport, who see what's going on around the world, who recognize that transport systems are about to change big time, and are beginning to think, well, what does that mean for local transport systems? So, the drone delivery of goods is now beginning to happen. It's slow, but it's beginning to happen. We have a company here in town, a large grocery chain in town, that's looking seriously about home delivery using drones in Edmonton. So this is a guy who's thinking globally about developments in drone technology, but he's applying that to local conditions. This is a kind of organic food company here. The third thing that we've seen is this whole thing of cross-boundary learning, where we might be engineers, but we actually know about people. We've done some psychology. We've understood some things about business strategy. We've understood some things about innovation and change. So we're curious and consciously curious about how things happen and how things work. In 2015, I wrote a book called How to Rethink the Future, which is about strategic planning that looks from the future and comes back. Most strategic plans are pretty grim documents to read. I walked into one company that had a 3-volume strategic plan. It was Barclays. And we threw that out and replaced it with a single page. But we actually imagined Barclays in 2020. This was 10 years ago, and came back every year to 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016, and so on, and said, what will Barclays have to do in this year to make that 2020 future possible? And clearly we couldn't predict some of the things that are happening, but we were pretty close in imagining a different future for parts of the banking business. And so that way of producing strategy is much more powerful than the traditional way of producing strategy. I made the point earlier that leaders that want to do innovation have to lead it in person, have to be on the ground, have to get engaged, have to be seen to be living what it is they're talking about. And that's why they have to lead systematic change. And they have to do that through a focus on performance with passion. There are so many chief execs and leaders in organizations that just work with their head. It drives me nuts. We need to see a lot more people connecting their hearts and minds and connecting their whole authentic self with the work that they're doing. Really good, sustainable change comes from those people that are authentic and are seen to be authentic, which takes you right back to the first of these things on this list: practice personal mastery. But I think there's a way of talking about this in a very simple way. So, yeah, of course that was going to happen. My phone's gone. Here we go. This is a slide from my colleague Pasi Solberg. Used to be at Harvard, but he's okay now. And he says, look, major change requires you to think ahead, to really be understanding where this change is supposed to go, and to keep that vision for change in the future constant in your head. And secondly, you have to lead across the organization, right across the organization, by example, but also by being there to make that thinking ahead work. And then you have to deliver within. You have to be really focused on delivering within. So this leadership, focused communication, managing capabilities, this is the work of innovation. And this is a powerful, simple slide that we have used extensively to help organizations test: are we ready? Are we managing? Are we leading for the change that we want to have? In higher education, I just want to talk about 2 examples that are massive changes that all reflect everything I've said since 9 o'clock. In Kentucky, the technical and community college system looked at everything they did and essentially said, there's nothing in the Bible or the Quran or any of the holy books that said every university or college course has to be 15 weeks long. And so they've broken everything down into 1, 2, and 3 weeks modules and made them all, you can start any one of these learning modules either in class or online 365 days a year. And so this change, this list of changes under this slide for Kentucky is huge. Now, it took 2.5 years to get to the point where they could start this work, and I would say it's taken them 3 on top of that, so that's 5 years to embed this as a way of working. But that's pretty powerful, and it's massively increased access and availability of learning in Kentucky, and it's a model that's now being used in 12 other countries around the world. So Kentucky suddenly is a flagship for innovation and change in the technical and vocational education system. And similar kind of developments are beginning to happen at the University of Wisconsin, where you can now obtain undergraduate and graduate degrees without attending a class, without having to follow online courses, but by saying, I'm ready to be assessed for this competence and capability. So, for example, an MBA may have 12 competency areas you have to demonstrate. When you're ready for one of those, you call for an assessment and you may attend an assessment day, and you can either then get that credit or not, but you don't have to attend any courses. So this is a way of everybody around this table right now getting a graduate degree because they are able and capable and have the knowledge. With whether we don't really care where you got it from, but we're ready to give you recognition for what you know and what you can do. So I think these are examples from higher education of major change. And another example is the use of mobile learning technology to transform farming in India. This is a project from the Commonwealth of Learning. And farmers are, most farming in India and Africa is small scale farming, mainly done by women. Using cell phones and voice messages, and then later supported by text messaging, farmers have been able to reorganize farms from being single family farms into cooperative farms. They've reorganized the supply chain. They've reorganized their relationship with banks. They've developed skills, literacy skills, because they're using the combination of voice and text to learn how to read. And this has massively changed how farming is done successfully in many parts of India, and now several parts of Africa, and increasingly some parts of the Caribbean. So here's an example of how mobile learning, which, and everybody that I saw when I was out in Sri Lanka and Africa and India, virtually everybody has a cell phone. This is a powerful way of equipping farmers with better knowledge and better skills. So here's my last slide. I just want to say in conclusion here, and we have a couple of minutes for me to respond to questions, that I think the future is very bright and transformative for lots of people if we choose to manage it well. We need national conversations about the future of work. We need conversations about the kind of knowledge and skills our young people have, and we're currently running some work with kids in schools throughout Alberta and in Norway, Finland, Iceland, and Singapore and Australia and New Zealand about the future of work and the meaning of school and the meaning of learning and the meaning of community. But we're at a kind of tipping point for lots of change in society, and we need to find the leadership that we need to have to make this future possible. What we need to do is to equip more people with the skills of Renaissance leadership to enable this to happen. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this podcast. So that's the show. Now I'll start looking at questions here. We have 5 minutes to go. So Pat Todd's saying that you did something similar in East Africa using cell phones, and this is around medical information. Absolutely. Some of the colleagues, like Abdullah, who's part of the Lex network, is using cell technologies for this kind of stuff right now, but also for medical records. So, yeah, questions about the unemployed. Yeah, there's lots of significant work going on in creating, in seeing employment as about creating your own jobs. And so we have a number of teams here in the city of Edmonton that are helping particularly young people who are finding it difficult to find work. And we have about an 11.5% youth unemployment rate here to help create new opportunities for them to create their own businesses that produce livelihoods for them. There's a lot of work going on livelihoods as part of the Sustainable Development Goals around the world. Startups, yeah, Stephen asking about startups. Huge amount of work on startups. In Toronto, Ryerson University is the leading business incubator in North America. It's doing a huge amount of work in helping startups start. It's the most successful incubator in North America and was recognized last year as being such. So I think that there are some fantastic examples in pockets around the world of really good work on business startups, especially for young people. But one of the points I keep making is lots of pockets of innovation do not make a suit. So we need to find ways of connecting the dots and to have a much more comprehensive and cohesive approach to future skills and future work. So that's why the federal government's paper that was released on the 6th of February called Future Skills from the Advisory Council on Economic Growth, it's on their website, is a very interesting document. It's written by Dominic Barton, and Dominic is the managing partner for McKinsey Global until July of next year, and also a Canadian. He chairs the Advisory Council, and he's all over the issues I've been raising here and has some great material that's well worth looking at. Oh, you're going to CASIA, Maggie. Well done. I helped found the Innovation Summit at CASIA with Don Simpson and Bob Mitchell and others. So, yeah, good luck. I think the real change is how we think about energy systems and ecosystems for energy, as opposed to competing as providers of energy. The great example of CASIA is through collaboration we can achieve more. Well, that's also true in the marketplace. And so I think the real thing to think about is how companies can partner together to deliver ecosystem energy solutions to groups of consumers. So think cooperative provision and cooperative consumption, and reimagine the market rather than lots of individual consumers, group buyers in residential neighborhoods. I think there's lots of ways of thinking differently about that sector.
So, Stephen, can I step in?
Yeah, I'm done.
Good. Well, sorry for my technical problems. I want to thank Stephen. He has set the bar incredibly high for all the subsequent pop-up discussions that we have. I can't think of a powerful hour in which the context for the Leaders Expedition has been defined, and I think from a position of optimism, but also the need for the Leaders Expedition is also illuminated by the work that Stephen and Don and others have done, but they also illuminate the possibilities that lie ahead. Stephen, I'm assuming that the presentation can be shared with folks. I think I saw you say absolutely, and as I did note, yeah. So if you could turn your volume down again, Stephen, because I can't. Thanks. Thanks. I'm just going to suggest, in fact, it's not a suggestion, all pop-up circles are recorded and are made available on the Lex Hub. I'm going to do that later today, and that can serve as the continuation of this discussion. So if I would suggest that if anybody has further questions of Stephen, I'm sure he would be disposed to answer them. We can start a discussion, and you'll see it on the Lex Hub later today. And again, I remind anybody that if you have a topic that you'd like to share in a similar context, perhaps one a bit freer of technological challenge, then we can organize another pop-up. But with that, I want to thank the participants and again, most especially Steve Murgatroyd. That was very, very well done and much appreciated. So thank you all. Take care.